Hello everyone, how's it going? Coming at you today with two, hopefully not too long videos, both about writers in this lovely anthology we're still reading. And again, I said on this that I'm slowing down from the syllabus and gonna just talk to you about a few poets a day, and then next week I'll also if you look in the syllabus, um, we were discussed the movie They Live, and what I'm going to try to do with that is film my DVD commentary, commenting on the film, and then you can watch the film at your own pace, and you can listen to my commentary track on the film as well. And I'll post that next. Uh, I'll post that next uh, uh, Wednesday. Okay, but for now, this week, today, we're going to talk about two of the poets I mentioned on the syllabus for today, Baraka and Sanchez. And then next time, we'll talk about Etheridge Knight and June Jordan and Lucille Clifton on Wednesday. And then on the next Monday, we'll talk about Nikki Giovanni, Ishmael Reed, and Stephanie. Okay, so just off by a day because there is no poetry recital in Salon as I had planned for next week. And then the final exam is optional. I will have the assignment for you soon. If you're doing it strictly to replace a lower grade. You can also rewrite something from previously if you want to improve your grade and not worry about the new material for the final. Okay, so you have that option. And again, I'm doing this as a humane, sensible, charitable, just thing in the midst of this crazy crisis that I know from so many of you is directly impacting your health or your family's health. And it's the least I can do is try to make this class a more manageable amount of work and responsibility for you. Okay, so anyways, back to the book and to this writer, Amiri Baraka, aka Leroy Jones, one of the greats, one of my favorite figures in American literature, in the American culture, really overall in the last century, if not the whole damn time of it. Amiri Baraka was born in 1934 in Newark, New Jersey, and he died there in 2014. If you're noticing in the book, his poems begin on page. Where do they begin? Page 211. It listed as he's still alive. When this book came out, it was 1971, so he was all of 37. He was younger than me. But already at that time, a very accomplished and renowned figure. Baraka was a poet, a music critic, a playwright. Most famous place called The Dutchman. It exists as a film. You can watch it on YouTube. I'll put a link to it in the Black Poets video playlist if I haven't already. He was also an essayist. He was a political organizer, an activist, and he founded this thing we call the Black Arts Movement, which was kind of the. Sorry, my pen is running out of gas here. How's this one doing? Okay, that's better. Which was kind of like the 1960s and 70s version of the Harlem Renaissance. A more dispersed movement, but one that was seeking to empower Black people and disseminate their culture more broadly and widely, okay, through the arts. So many things to say about Baraka. I mean, he was a man who, going back to Newark, he's very associated with Newark. He's also associated with New York City and Harlem and the Lower East Side. He taught at SUNY Stony Brook. His son, Raz Baraka, is the current mayor of Newark, New Jersey. So he's had this sort of legacy in the city. His son is not really he's cut from the same cloth, but as they say, the trees falling a little far from the fruits falling a little far from the tree. He's more of kind of a middle of the road, uh, liberal Democrat, kind of less progressive than even Bernie Sanders or someone like that. His father, Baraka, was a radical, political radical, artistic radical. I would not say extremist. I would say radical. In what sense? People often say the word when you talk about someone who's radical in politics, you mean someone extreme. But the other way to think about someone being radical, and this especially applies to people on the political left, people fighting for freedom and justice for the oppressed, uh, people to expand economic and political rights to people who don't have them. That's really the project of the political left. Uh, People on the left who are described as radical, the way to think about it is not that they're extreme. The way to think about it is that the way you use the word radical when you talk about math and mathematics. To take the radical of a number in mathematics is to go to the root, of the problem. And that's what radicals like Baraka were always searching for. What's the root? What's the fundamental cause? Okay? And in his journey, he went from a kind of avant-garde, bohemian, hipster culture, like the black guy in the white world of downtown Manhattan literary culture in the 1950s and early 60s, to the Black Power movement, and his changing his name to Amiri Baraka from Leroy Jones after the death of Malcolm X, and seeking a really like a black, almost like a separate black culture through the black arts movement, to then breaking with that and finally adopting and really sticking by it for most of the rest of his life, an orientation in left-wing politics you would call third world Marxist, almost Maoist. He was championing the cause of independence for previously colonized people in the 1970s, and he really never changed his orientation. He remained a Marxist. Okay, and Marxists are committed to the notion, above all, of class struggle, that there's the rich and the poor, and the rich are rich not coincidentally because the poor are poor, but because the poor are poor. And as the rich grow rich, the poor grow poor. And how do you change that? By organizing the poor, the working class, to fight back and take back what's been taken from them, the fruits of their labors, the products of their labor, because that's where profits come from. Profits come from, according to the Marxist account, human labor that then is unjustly compensated and exploited and immiserated. Okay, so that's sort of a rambling introduction, but as hopefully it's coming across, I'm very excited to talk about this poet. Let's start. So we're gonna really kind of that part of his career, the Marxist period, that begins even after this book was published. So it's not really part of the literature you were reading. But the two earlier parts are the kind of pre-Black nationalist, pre-radicalization period, and then the Black nationalist period when he starts the Black arts movement. So we'll look at two of those parts. And what you see with the real change that takes place is not. It's very simple. It goes from me to we. That's all he does. Everything else kind of remains the same. The kind of electric charge of the writing, the dark imagery, the kind of fascination with violence and death, the polemics, really the war of words that he wanted to wage, and that he always did, is there. And if you want, and you can really see the he does become a Marxist eventually, but already as early as 1960, you can see the seeds for that being sown. For example, he's like a lot of Americans on the political left, he was very inspired by the Cuban Revolution in 1959, and he visited Cuba in 1960 and had this awakening there. about the cause of freedom and justice for oppressed people all over the world. That the Cuban revolutionary victory really signaled was a great symbol for. And America's perception of Cuba was altered right after that by the Cuban Missile Crisis and the sort of the years of economic warfare and propaganda we've been fed. But you have to imagine in 1960 none of that was in place yet, and a lot of people on the political left were inspired and remain so. I mean, when you look at Cuba's public health system and its literacy rates, they're better than the United States. Okay, because they have different values. All right. So, anyways, let's look at the first poem in the book by Amiri Baraka, page 211, as agony at period as now period. This is maybe his most quoted poem, and really the poetic literary community, because it's not Marxist and it tends to be more kind of elite and not really thinks of talking politics and art too much as almost being like poor manners, bad taste, and this sort of thing. These are the poems that are the most often quoted, the most anthologized, the most frequently read. This period before his Black nationalist period. This is from a book called The Dead Lecturer, and the book that's his second book of poetry. The first is called Preface to a 10,000 volume suicide note or something like that. Very funny name. Let me get the name right. I love that book title. I never remember the name of it. What is the name of that book? Preface to a 20-volume suicide note. Sorry. All right. Okay, so I'm going to read this poem and give a commentary. I am inside someone who hates me. I look out from his eyes. Smell what fouled tunes come into his breath. Love his wretched women. How's that possible that you can be inside someone who hates your... Well, there's a famous term from, again, this guy I've mentioned a number of times now, W.B. Du Bois, in his book Souls of Black Folks, and in an article that preceded it, he described being black in America as having a double consciousness. You know who you are, you know what you're capable of, but you also you perceive yourself as yourself, like any normal person. But then you also, to a degree that's different from the dominant culture, as an oppressed minority and as a black person, you perceive yourself through the eyes of the white majority, the dominant white culture. And this leads to, in this case, this feeling he has. I'm inside someone who hates me. The part of himself that hates him is the part that identifies with the white establishment, the white literary world. His first wife, who he left when he was radicalized, was a Jewish author. Okay? I'm inside someone who hates me. I look out from his eyes. Smell what fouled tunes come into his breath. Love his wretched woman. Slits in the metal for sun. Where my eyes sit turning at the cool air, the glance of light, or hard flesh rubbed against me. A woman, a man, without shadow, or voice, or meaning. This is the enclosure. Flesh, where innocence is a weapon, an abstraction, touch. Not mine or yours, if you are the soul I had and abandoned when I was blind and had my enemies carry me as a dead man, if he is beautiful or pitied, it can be pain. As now, as all this flesh hurts me, it can be that, or pain, or when she ran from me into that forest. Or pain, the mind silver spiraled whirled against the sun, higher than even old men thought God would be. or pain in the other. The yes. Inside his books, his fingers, they are withered, yellow flowers, and were never beautiful. The yes. You will, lost soul, say beauty, beauty practiced as the trees, the slow river, a white sun in its wet sentences. Or the cold men in their gale, ecstasy, flesh or souls, the yes. Their robes blown, their bowls empty, they chant at my heels, not at yours. Flesh or soul as corrupt, where the answer moves too quickly, where the God is a self after all. Cold air blown through the narrow blind eyes, flesh white hot metal, glows as the day with its sun. It is a human love I live inside, a bony skeleton you recognize as words or simple feeling. But it has no feeling. As the metal is hot, it is not given to love. It burns the thing inside it, and that thing screams. And you see the tension in the double consciousness, no? The entire middle the entire middle of the poem is drawn up with within a series of parentheses that go from the third stanza of the first page, all the way till almost the end of the poem. There's this whole where you could see a kind of dialogue between the two consciousnesses. So if we look at that again, this is the enclosure, and then begins the kind of back and forth with the self, the one, the true self being inside the one, the outward one that seemed to hate him. Not mine or yours, if you are the soul I had and abandoned when I was blind, and had my enemies carried me as a dead man, if he is beautiful or pitied. Again, this is the enclosure. Flesh, where innocence is a weapon, an abstraction, touch. Whose innocence is a weapon? Well, for a person like Baraka, this radical person who's on his way to becoming a political radical, the innocence of the dominant culture of white America, okay, that is a weapon they use against the minorities, against black people, brown people, etc. Okay, they are innocent. They are presumed innocent. Like, to give you a simple sense of how their innocence is a weapon, think about the Black Lives Matter movement and their criticism of the police. Yes, there's police brutality. Yes, there's the killing of cops, or the killing of innocent people by the police in the black community. And that would all be bad, and it is bad. But what really got the movement going, what really pisses people off, is that the cops are considered innocent until they like to give you a famous example from when I was a kid growing up in LA, the Rodney King beating, and then the subsequent trial where all these cops all beat up Rodney King. And yeah, he was resisting, he was in a high-speed chase and all this sort of stuff. And then when they were let off, when they were all found not guilty, the city of Los Angeles and the surrounding areas, I grew up in Long Beach, California, they erupted in protests and riots, whatever you want to call it, looting, etc. Sure, people took advantage of the situation, but the idea that the cops were innocent was just galling. And then if you think about, for example, the killing of Eric Garner in Staten Island, this older black man who would periodically, occasionally sell cigarettes on the street without a permit or a license. This is nominally illegal. The cops, the day they stopped him, he wasn't actually doing that. He was just hanging out, and they choked him to death. And then the cops Not only were they were so innocent that they weren't even brought up on charges. The DA refused to indict the police officer who killed him. Okay, so that innocence is a weapon. In the sense that knowing that, having that message go out to the cops is saying, hey, the society, the white majority, the taxpayers, whatever you want to call them, they support this. They assume you're innocent, and you can use that. You can weaponize that. Okay, so that's already you see in the prior to the black nationalist turn that there was grounds for it. It was becoming that way. Let's look at one other poem, because this is really the poem that starts it really serves as a manifesto for the black arts movement. What's a manifesto? A manifesto is a statement of principles. If it's a political one, it might generally be of like a political party. It might say their program, that is like the demands they have or the policy ideas they would put in place. You know, when it's a artistic one like this, it will say the goals of the movement, what they want to inspire, the change they want to make, the institutions they want to create for the arts. The Black Arts Movement did create institutions. It created literary magazines, newspapers, this thing called the Black Arts Repertory Theater in Harlem that was founded by Baraka. Baraka was a playwright, so he wrote plays for it. And this poem is astonishing. It's incendiary. That is, it's trying to like light things on fire. It has its limitations. You'll see some anti-Semitism in it, and Baraka would, if you look him up on the internet, the first thing you probably come across is that he wrote a poem after 9/11 happened called "Somebody Blew Up America," where he, among other things in the poem, puts forward this conspiracy theory that how come no Israelis died in the Twin Towers attacks? Did they have advance notice of it? These sorts of ideas, which are unfounded, but it speaks to his sort of lifelong struggle with anti-Semitism. He would succumb to it, as a lot of people on the political left occasionally do, in the midst of their frustrations with Israel and how it treats Palestinians, with their frustrations with how the U.S. seems to prefer Israel to all other countries in the Middle East. So it predominantly anti-Semitism is a thing on the political right. It's the hatred of Jews that comes from the political right, and it's the standard thing that Hitler did and so many other people do to this day, where they scapegoat them. Oh, it's not capitalism that's causing your problems, it's the Jewish bankers, the Rothschilds, the other Swiss groups, and so on. George Soros, Jeffrey Epstein, etc. So, but you see Baraka falling prey to that here. But this poem is astonishing. Okay, when I read it out loud in class, I have to tell students, don't worry, it's just a poem. I'm on page 223. Black art. What is black art? He's about to tell you what it should be in 1965, after the assassination of Malcolm X. Poems are bullshit unless they are teeth or trees or lemons piled on a step, or black ladies dying of men leaving nickel hearts beating them down. Fuck poems, and they are useful. Would they shoot, come at you, love what you are, breathe like wrestlers, or shudder strangely after pissing? We want live words of the hip world, live flesh and coursing blood, hearts, brains, souls, splintering fire. Again, that incendiary rhetoric. Light things on fire. We want poems like fist-beating niggers out of jocks, or dagger poems in the slimy bellies of the owner Jews. Black poems to smear on griddle mama mulatto bitches whose brains are red jelly stuck between Elizabeth Taylor's toes. In other words, don't succumb. We want poems that fight with the blacks who accept white culture as the norm, accept the standards of white beauty as their standards, getting a weave rather than wearing your hair natural and so on. Stinking whores. We want poems that kill. Assassin poems. I've turned the page now. Assassin poems. Poems that shoot guns. Poems that wrestle cops into alleys and take their weapons, leaving them dead, with their tongues pulled out and sent to Ireland. Knock-off poems for dope-selling wops or slick half-white politicians. Airplane poems. You see like the sound of a machine gun. There's like this onomatopoeia, and that is the sound of the sound that you're trying to evoke. You get in the words themselves. It's a poetic device. Setting fire and death to Whitey's ass. Look at the liberal spokesman for the Jews clutch his throat and puke himself into eternity. There's a Negro leader pinned to a bar stool in Sardis, eyeballs melting in hot flame. Another Negro leader on the steps of the White House, one kneeling before the sheriff's thighs, negotiating coolly for his people. Ugh. Stumbles across the room. Put it on him, poem. Strip him naked to the world. Another bad poem cracking steel knuckles in a Jew lady's mouth. Poems scream poison gas on beasts in green berets. Clean out the world for virtue and love. Let there be no love poems written until love can exist freely and cleanly. Let black people understand that they are the lovers and sons of lovers, and warriors and sons of warriors, are poems and poets and all the loveliness here in the world. We want a black poem and a black world. Let the world be a black poem, and let all black people speak this poem silently or loud. And there's the manifesto part at the end. We want a black poem and a black world. Let the world be a black poem. And you see the ambiguity. Is he calling for a separate world for blacks, or is he saying black culture should come to dominate, almost like conquer, right? Let the world be a black poem. Become the dominant force. Okay? That was never in the offing, the way they went about it, through literature, through drama, through you're not contesting where the mainstream is, which was and remains in film and television, and to some extent now in digital media and so on, advertising and this sort of stuff. So it was more separating themselves and making their own institutions, rather than attempting to really rival the dominant ones. So look, that's Baraka, and that's me rambling about him a little bit. Just on a personal note, he was still alive until 2014. I saw him speak when I was in college in 1996, a long time ago, and it was very inspiring. Brilliant speaker, very, very charismatic. You don't always agree with him, but you know where he stands, and he was just a larger-than-life kind of figure, and such a loss to American literature and American intellectual life when he passed away in 2014. So check him out. I put a bunch of interviews and speeches he gave onto the Black Poets playlist. And I'm coming back at you in a minute with one other shorter video. It'll be shorter, I promise, about Sonia Sanchez. Okay, take it easy.